For 30 years, I thought I knew who my family was. I thought we were average normal. We lived in a quiet suburban house, and my dad was just a regular father. He was an accountant, a man of quiet routines and even quieter budgets. He drove a 10-year-old car and spent his weekends in the garden. But I was wrong. About everything. A week after my father's funeral, I found a suitcase in his attic. And what was inside didn't just change my life. It rewrote my entire past. This is the story of how I discovered my family's secret billion-pound fortune, and the horrifying truth of how they got it. My childhood was aggressively, almost comically, average. We lived in a semi-detached house in a town you've never heard of. Our whole world revolved round school, homework, and Sunday dinners. My dad, Arthur, was the bedrock of this normalcy. He was predictable. Every morning he'd leave for the accounting firm he worked at with a flask of coffee and a packed lunch. Every evening he'd return at precisely 6:15 p.m. Our finances were a constant, low-level hum in the background. Dad was frugal to a fault. He'd pore over grocery receipts, follow us around switching off lights in empty rooms, and negotiate every single bill. We weren't poor, not really. But wealth was something that happened to other people in the movies. My friends had brand-name clothes. I had hand-me-downs. They went on holidays abroad. We went camping in the next county over. I loved my father, but I can't say I ever truly knew him. He was a quiet, walled-off man. He never spoke about his own childhood. All I knew was that he'd come to Britain from Germany as a young boy, right after the war. That was it. The subject was a closed door. Whenever I'd ask about his parents, my grandparents, he would just shake his head and say, "There's nothing to tell. The war took everything." I assumed he meant poverty, displacement, the common scars of that generation. I never, in my wildest dreams, could have imagined what was actually taken. I just accepted that his past was a place of pain, and I learned not to go there. My mother, who passed away when I was a teenager, once told me, "Your father built a new life from nothing. Be proud of that." And I was. I was proud of the quiet, simple man who had seemingly overcome some nameless tragedy to give me a stable, ordinary life. Dad's death was as quiet and undramatic as his life. A sudden heart attack at 78. One minute he was potting geraniums, the next he was gone. The silence he left behind felt immense. After the funeral, the house seemed cavernous, haunted by the ghost of his routines. The task of sorting through a lifetime of his things fell to me. It was a heartbreaking archaeology of an ordinary man. Decades of bank statements, meticulously filed. Warranties for appliances that were long gone. Old clothes that still smelled faintly of him. I was up in the attic, clearing out boxes of old Christmas decorations, when my foot hit a loose floorboard. Curiosity got the better of me. I pied it up, dust mushrooming into the staler. And there, nestled in the insulation, was a suitcase. It was heavy, made of dark, scuffed leather with tarnished brass latches. It looked ancient. I'd spent my whole childhood in this house and had never, ever seen it before. A small, tarnished key was taped to the handle with yellowed tape. My heart started to pound. This felt different. This felt like a secret. I lugged the suitcase downstairs. Its weight felt unnatural, dense. My hands were shaking as I fumbled with the key. The lock clicked open with a stiff, metallic groan. I lifted the lid, half expecting to find my father's secret coin collection or something equally mundane. But it wasn't coins. It was paper. Stacks and stacks of it, all bound in string. The documents were old, brittle, and covered in dense German script. Underneath them were photographs, black and white images of elegant men and women in 1930s clothes, posing outside a colossal, ornate building that looked more like a palace than a shop. I didn't recognize a single person. Then I found it, a German passport, issued in Berlin in 1937. I opened it, and the face staring back was my father's, only younger, happier. But the name wasn't Arthur Miller. It was Harry Meyer. My blood ran cold. Who was Harry Meyer? Beneath the passport was a thick, leather-bound ledger. I opened it. The pages were filled with columns of my father's neat, precise handwriting, but it wasn't just accounting. It was a story, a translation. On the left page of the ledger was a transcription of the old German documents, and on the right, his own English translation and his notes. It was a meticulous, secret project he had been working on for decades. The documents were property deeds, stock certificates, and inventories for a business I'd never heard of, the Wertheim department store. I had no idea what that was, so I did what anyone would do. I went to my computer and typed Wertheim department store Berlin into Google. The results hit me like a physical blow. Before the war, Wertheim wasn't just a store. It was an institution. One of the largest, most magnificent department store chains in Europe, owned by a prominent German Jewish family. The family of Harry Meyer. My family. I spent all night and then all of the next day glued to my screen, cross-referencing the documents from the suitcase with the history I was finding online. My father's hidden ledger was the Rosetta Stone to my own identity. The photos of those elegant people were the Meyers, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles. The palatial building was their flagship store on Leipziger Platz in Berlin, a place so grand it was nicknamed the Cathedral of Consumption. The stock certificates and property deeds weren't for some small family shop. They represented a controlling interest in a retail empire. My father's notes in the ledger were cold, analytical, and completely devastating. He had catalogued every asset. The buildings across Berlin. The inventory of silks, furniture, and fine goods. The corporate stock. He had even calculated their value, adjusting for inflation over 80 years. I had to sit down. My head was spinning. The numbers were just incomprehensible. It wasn't a few million. This was a claim that, by conservative estimates, could be worth over £1 billion today. I just stared at the wall. My mind a total blank. £1 billion. My father, the man who cut coupons and fretted about the price of petrol, was the heir to one of pre-war Germany's great fortunes. It made no sense. None of it. It felt like a dream. I looked at the worn-out furniture in his living room, the faded carpets, and then back at the documents detailing the lost world of impossible wealth. And a question started burning in my mind, the same one I'm sure you're asking yourself right now. What would you have done? This discovery threw my entire world into chaos and put me at a crossroads I never imagined. Before I tell you what I decided, and the darker truths I was yet to uncover, I'm genuinely curious. What would you do if you found this? Let me know in the comments. This story gets a lot more complicated, so if you want to follow the journey, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That feeling, the euphoria, the sheer shock of the number, it all evaporated as I read deeper into my father's ledger. The story the documents told wasn't one of wealth. It was a meticulously documented story of theft. Starting in 1933, the notes became chillingly precise. My father had chronicled the Aryanization of the Wertheim business, the systematic, state-sponsored campaign to force Jewish owners to sell their assets for a fraction of their worth to Aryan Germ. And he documented the crippling taxes, the boycotts, the threats. And then, the forced sale in the late 1930s. The entire Meyer family fortune stores, the properties, the legacy built over generations was stolen. Signed away under duress for pennies on the pound. The final documents in the suitcase were the most personal and the most horrifying. They were letters from my grandfather, desperately trying to get his family out of Germany. Letters detailing the terror and paranoia of a world closing in on them. And then, the final entry in my father's ledger, dated 1942. His parents and his younger sister were deported to Auschwitz. They never came back. My father, Ari, had been sent to England on one of the last Kindertransport trains, a frightened 10-year-old boy, all alone. He arrived with nothing, but the clothes on his back and a new name. Arthur Miller, a name so common, so English, that no one would ever look twice, no one would ever connect him to the Jewish family that had been erased. And in that moment, I finally understood. I understood the quietness, the frugality, the locked door to his past. It wasn't just trauma. It was a calculated act of survival. He had spent his entire life running from the ghost of Ari Meyer. He chose a life of deliberate, suffocating normalcy to protect himself and to protect me from the weight of that history. The fortune wasn't a prize, it was a curse. It was a giant, screaming reminder of everything he had lost. Hiding it, burying it in the attic, was his way of burying his dead. He hadn't built a new life from nothing. He had built it on top of the ruins of a spectacular, stolen one. For weeks, I was just adrift, lost in a sea of shock and grief. Grief for the father I never really knew, for the family that was stolen from me, and a profound, burning anger at the injustice of it all. My father wasn't a quiet accountant. He was a survivor, a silent keeper of a terrible history, who carried this billion-pound secret like a lead weight in his soul. So, what do you do with a fortune that isn't really money, but a historical claim? The assets are now owned by a massive German retail corporation that absorbed the company that first acquired Wertheim under the Nazis. The properties are prime real estate in the center of a reunified Berlin. This wasn't a matter of walking into a bank with a key. This is going to be a fight. A long, painful, and bureaucratic legal battle for restitution. And I've made my decision. I am going to fight. I've hired a firm that specializes in Holocaust-era restitution cases, a process that could take years, even decades. But I'm not doing it for a new car or a bigger house. The thought of that feels obscene. I'm doing it to reclaim my family's name, to force the world to acknowledge what was done to the Meyers and to countless families just like them. This isn't my money. It's a legacy of blood and terror. If and when we succeed in this claim, the vast majority of it will not go to me. I'm going to establish the Meyer Family Foundation, dedicated to Holocaust education, funding restitution efforts for other families who are still fighting and supporting survivors. It's the only thing that makes sense. To turn this instrument of my family's destruction into a tool for justice and remembrance. My dad hid his past to give me a normal life. But the truth is, my life was never going to be normal, was it? It was built on a foundation of silence and unimaginable loss. The greatest treasure in that suitcase wasn't the evidence of a billion-pound fortune. It was the truth. It was the story of Ari Meyer. My father gave up his name, his history, and his inheritance just to survive. It is now my responsibility, my honor, to reclaim all three for him. This fight for justice is just beginning. The real inheritance he left me wasn't money. It was a mission. And I will not fail.